The metallic crunch was sickening, a sound of violence that didn't belong in the sun-drenched afternoon of the park. It was followed by a sharp, urgent hiss, the sound of life escaping. My daughter Lily gasped, her small hand flying to her throat, as if to catch the breath that was suddenly being stolen from her. I was on my feet, before my mind had fully processed the image. A woman, her face, a mask of furious righteousness, grinding her heel into the delicate silver shell of Lily's portable oxygen tank. "This is a public park, not a hospital ward." The woman spat, her voice laced with a venom that seemed to curdle the air. "We don't need this. This clutter scaring the other children." Lily's eyes, the color of warm honey, were wide, with a terror that ripped through me, a primal fear that superseded every protocol, every ounce of training I had ever received. Her chest began to heave, the familiar, terrifying pattern of a respiratory attack beginning. The thin plastic tubing that snaked from the now crushed tank to the cannula beneath her nose was useless, a cruel mockery of the lifeline it had been just moments before. "Get away from her!" I snarled, my voice a low growl I barely recognized as my own. I moved my body a shield between the woman and my child, my hands automatically going to Lily, checking her pulse, assessing her breathing. It was shallow, rapid. We had minutes, maybe less. The woman took a step back, her expression shifting from righteous anger to a flicker of something else. Perhaps surprise at the ferocity of my response, or perhaps the dawning, horrifying realization of what she had just done. The rules are clear. No large equipment on the grass. That was her oxygen. I said the words tight, each one a shard of ice in my throat. I was already unzipping my backpack, my fingers searching for the emergency backup tank, the smaller, heavier cylinder we carried for moments. Exactly like this. Moments of catastrophic failure. My mind was a whirlwind of calculations: flow rate, remaining pressure, the time it would take for paramedics to arrive. "You just tried to kill my daughter." Her face paled, the manufactured outrage draining away to reveal a brittle, chalky fear. "That's absurd. Don't be so dramatic. It's just a little tank." "It's her lungs," I shot back, my hands finally closing around the cold, reassuring weight of the backup tank. I worked with frantic efficiency, my movements honed by years of practice, of drills of real-world disasters. Detach the broken regulator, connect the new one, twist the valve. The soft, life-giving hiss of flowing oxygen was the most beautiful sound in the world. I fitted the cannula back under Lily's nose, murmuring soft words of encouragement, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe with me. Slow and easy." Lily's panicked gasps began to slow, her eyes still wide with fear locked on mine. She trusted me. In her world of fragile health and constant vigilance, I was the anchor, the one who always knew what to do. But in that moment, looking at the woman who was now inching away, her face, a mixture of disbelief and self-preservation, I felt a rage so pure, so absolute, it threatened to consume me. She had not just broken a piece of medical equipment. She had attacked the very core of my world. She had tried to extinguish the light of my life. And she had done it in a public park, in the bright light of day, fueled by an arrogance so profound, it defied comprehension. "Don't you dare move!" I commanded, my voice now, devoid of heat, replaced by a chilling calm that was far more dangerous. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency contact. "You are not going anywhere. You just committed a felony. And you have absolutely no idea who you just did it to." The woman stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, a flicker of defiance still warring with the growing terror in her eyes. She saw a father, angry and protective. She couldn't see the man whose entire professional life was dedicated to managing chaos, to understanding the precise mechanics of life and death, and to holding accountable those who would willfully disrupt that delicate balance. She didn't know that I was the head of the state emergency services, and that I had the power, the knowledge, and the unwavering resolve to bring the full weight of the law down upon her. She had picked a fight in a park, but she had just declared war on a man who commanded the state's entire arsenal of crisis response. Our life was a carefully constructed fortress of routine and preparedness. Being the director of the State Office of Emergency Management meant my days were a relentless cycle of planning for the unthinkable hurricanes that could swallow coastlines, wildfires that devoured forests, industrial accidents that poisoned the air. I lived in a world of worst-case scenarios, of contingency plans, of color-coded threat levels. My job was to protect millions of people from chaos. But my most important job, the one that defined my very existence, was protecting one small, fiercely determined girl. Lily had been born with a rare congenital condition that left her lungs underdeveloped, a fragile architecture that required constant support. From her earliest days, the quiet hiss of an oxygen concentrator was the background music of our lives. Her world was circumscribed by the length of her tubing, the battery life of her portable tanks, the constant vigilance against infection. But we had refused to let her condition define her. My late wife Sarah had been a force of nature, a brilliant botanist, who had filled our home with life, with art, with an unshakable belief in Lily's potential. She had taught Lily to see the beauty in the smallest details, to find joy in the delicate veins of a leaf, the intricate patterns of a flower petal. After Sarah passed away from a sudden illness 2 years ago, the silence in our house had been deafening. The vibrant colors of her life seemed to fade, leaving just the sterile hum of the medical equipment. It was then that I made a conscious decision. I would not let our lives become a sterile waiting room. I would take the skills I used to manage statewide disasters and apply them to our small world of two. I planned our days with military precision, not to restrict Lily, but to empower her. We had backup plans for our backup plans. Every outing, every trip to the grocery store, every visit to the park was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to give her the freedom and normalcy she so fiercely craved. We lived in a quiet, manicured subdivision called Willow Creek, a place that prided itself on its family-friendly atmosphere, its pristine common areas, and its notoriously zealous homeowners association. The park where the incident occurred was the jewel of the community, a sprawling expanse of green, with a meticulously maintained playground and a picturesque duck pond. It was our sanctuary, the one place where Lily could feel the sun on her face and the grass between her fingers, a brief respite from the confines of our home. Lily, at 9 years old, was a study in contrasts. She was physically fragile, yet possessed an inner strength that humbled me. She was a gifted artist, her sketchbooks filled with breathtakingly detailed drawings of the natural world her mother had taught her to love. She rarely complained about the limitations her body placed upon her. Her biggest frustration was with the people who saw only the tank, the tubing, the visible markers of her disability, and not the bright, inquisitive, funny girl who loved bad jokes and had an encyclopedic knowledge of dinosaur fossils. The woman who had stomped on her tank was a face I recognized, but a person I did not know. Her name, I would soon learn, was Carol Fletcher. She was a prominent figure in the HOA, known for her rigid enforcement of the community's labyrinthine rules and her frequent self-important posts on the neighborhood social media page. We had never spoken, but I had seen her at community meetings, her lips perpetually pursed in a look of stern disapproval. She was one of those people who seemed to derive a sense of purpose from policing the lives of others. The inciting incident in the park was not just a random act of cruelty. It was the catastrophic collision of two worlds, Carol Fletcher's world of rigid rules and perceived order, and Lily's world of fragile, hard-won freedom. It was the spark that ignited a firestorm, a conflict that would move beyond the grassy field of a suburban park and into the very heart of our community, testing my resolve, threatening my career, and pushing my family to the breaking point. It was a brutal, terrifying assault that shattered the carefully constructed peace of our lives, and set us on a collision course with a darkness we never knew existed so close to home. The immediate aftermath was a blur of controlled panic. While I stabilized Lily, another parent, a young mother who had witnessed the whole thing, was already on the phone with 911, her voice trembling but clear. The wail of sirens grew closer, a sound that in my professional life was a call to action, but in my personal life was a beacon of desperate hope. The paramedics were efficient, their calm professionalism a soothing balm on the raw wound of the moment. They checked Lily's vitals, their practiced hands a stark contrast to the violent, ignorant stomp that had caused this crisis. Carol Fletcher stood frozen, a statue of disbelief, as the first police officer arrived. The reality of the situation seemed to be crashing down on her in waves. "It was a misunderstanding," she began, her voice a reedy whisper. "The park has rules about large equipment. I'm on the HOA board." The officer, a young man with a serious face, gave her a long, hard look before turning his attention to me. I gave him a concise, factual account of what had happened, my voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I am a good witness. I am trained to be." I described the argument, Carol's words, the deliberate, forceful stomp on the oxygen tank. The young mother who had called 911 corroborated my story, her own voice shaking with indignation. "She called it clutter," the witness said. "She said it was scaring the other children." The officer's pen scratched across his notepad. He asked Carol for her identification. She fumbled in her oversized purse, her hands shaking. The armor of her self-righteousness had been stripped away, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. As the paramedics prepared to transport Lily to the hospital for observation, a standard precaution after any significant respiratory event, the rising action of our nightmare began its insidious climb. The first escalation came within 48 hours. After a blessedly uneventful night in the hospital, Lily was discharged, and we returned to the fragile sanctuary of our home. I had given my official statement to the police, and a detective had been assigned to the case. The initial charge was aggravated assault and destruction of medical equipment. But the battle was far from confined to the legal system. Carol Fletcher, it turned out, was not one to retreat. She was a fighter, and she chose her battlefield with strategic precision, the court of public opinion, specifically the Willow Creek HOA online forum. Her post was a masterpiece of manipulation and victim blaming. She painted herself as a dedicated community volunteer, a concerned resident simply trying to enforce the rules for the safety and enjoyment of everyone. She described me as an aggressive and unstable man who had verbally assaulted her. She claimed the oxygen tank was a large metallic object that posed a trip hazard, and that she had merely nudged it with her foot to point it out. The deliberate stomp, the hiss of escaping oxygen, Lily's fight for breath, all of it was erased from her narrative. The most venomous part was reserved for my daughter. Without using Lily's name, she referred to a chronically ill child whose parents irresponsibly brought intrusive medical hardware into a public space, showing a lack of consideration for the normal children who wanted to play. The comment section exploded. A faction of residents, longtime supporters of Carol's rigid brand of community management, rushed to her defense. They praised her for her vigilance. They complained about the special treatment some families expected. The poison of her words seeped into the digital ether, creating a narrative that was a grotesque distortion of the truth. My friends and a handful of supportive neighbors pushed back, defending me, defending Lily, but they were quickly shouted down by a vocal, vitriolic mob. The lines were being drawn. The second shocking incident was more direct, a calculated abuse of her power. A certified letter arrived from the HOA. It was a formal notice of violation. Our offense, the accessibility ramp leading to our front door. The ramp, which had been professionally installed and approved by the previous HOA board years ago, was now deemed to be not in aesthetic harmony with the community's architectural standards. We were given 30 days to remove it or face daily fines. It was a declaration of war. The ramp was not a matter of convenience. It was a necessity. On days when Lily's breathing was particularly labored, the few steps to our front door could feel like a mountain. The ramp ensured she could enter and exit her own home with dignity and safety. To attack the ramp was to attack her freedom to try and confine her to the four walls of our house. It was a cruel, vindictive act designed to inflict maximum emotional and practical distress. I knew with a chilling certainty that Carol Fletcher was behind it. She was using the bureaucratic machinery of the HOA as a weapon, a way to punish us for daring to challenge her. The message was clear. You don't belong here. Your sick child doesn't belong here. Your accommodations for her disability do not belong here. We will fine you, harass you, and legislate you out of our perfect little community. The fight was no longer about a single moment of violence in the park. It was about our right to exist, to occupy space, to live in peace. And I knew as I held that letter in my hand that I would have to use every resource at my disposal, professional and personal, to fight back. This was no longer just a father protecting his child. This was a director of emergency management, facing a localized domestic threat with the potential to destroy his family. And I would neutralize it. The pressure began to mount from all sides, a coordinated assault that felt like a siege. The HOA violation notice was just the opening salvo. Carol Fletcher, having tasted blood, escalated her campaign with a chilling efficiency. She started a private Facebook group, ostensibly for Willow Creek Community Standards, but its true purpose was a thinly veiled platform to harass my family. Anonymous accounts, which I suspected were Carol and her closest allies, posted photos of our house circling the ramp, complaining about the unsightly nature of our property. They began to invent stories, claiming they heard loud arguments coming from our home at all hours, insinuating that I was an unstable single father. They were trying to build a case brick by insidious brick to portray me as a problem resident, a nuisance to be eliminated. The smear campaign reached a new level of viciousness when she targeted my career. An official complaint was filed with the governor's office, sent anonymously, but bearing all the hallmarks of Carol's manipulative prose. It accused me of abuse of power and conduct unbecoming a state official. It twisted the events in the park, claiming I had used my position to intimidate her and to orchestrate a wrongful arrest of a concerned citizen. It referenced the HOA violations, framing me as a man who believed he was above the rules that governed everyone else. My boss, Governor Miller, called me into his office. He was a good man, a career public servant I respected immensely. He slid the printed-out complaint across his polished mahogany desk. "Mark, I know this is garbage," he said, his expression weary. "But it's official. It's on the record. I have to launch an internal review. My hands are tied." The words hit me like a physical blow. An internal review. My entire career, built on a foundation of integrity and meticulous professionalism, was now under a microscope because of a vindictive lie. I felt a surge of cold fury, but I suppressed it, falling back on years of training. "I understand, sir. I will cooperate fully. My only concern is for my daughter." "How is she?" he asked, his tone softening. "She's resilient." I said the word, feeling inadequate to describe the quiet courage Lily displayed every day. But the truth was, she was not unaffected. She had stopped asking to go to the park. She spent more time in her room, her sketchbook filled with dark, shadowy figures, instead of the vibrant flowers and animals she used to draw. She overheard hushed phone calls, saw the worry etched on my face, and felt the oppressive atmosphere that had descended upon our home. The joy we had fought so hard to cultivate was being choked by the weeds of Carol's hatred. The third escalation was the most terrifying. It was a direct act of intimidation that crossed a line from harassment into something far more dangerous. Lily's life depended on a steady supply of liquid oxygen, delivered weekly in large cryogenic dewars by a specialized medical supply company. One Tuesday, the delivery never came. I called the company, my anxiety mounting with each ring. A flustered dispatcher informed me that they had received a call earlier that morning from a woman claiming to be my new home health aide, canceling all future deliveries. The woman had provided my account number and address. My blood ran cold. There was no new health aide. It was Carol. She had somehow obtained my account information and had deliberately cut off my daughter's lifeline. We had enough oxygen in the main home tank to last for another 48 hours, and I still had the portable emergency backups, but the audacity of the act was staggering. This wasn't about HOA rules or online gossip anymore. This was a direct, calculated attempt to inflict harm. This was in the cold, hard language of my profession, an act of domestic terrorism aimed at a single, vulnerable target. I immediately contacted the detective on the case, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Isabella Rossi. I explained what had happened, my voice tight with a rage I could barely contain. "This is attempted murder, Rossi," I said. "She is actively trying to kill my daughter by cutting off her medical supply." Rossi was silent for a moment. "This woman is unhinged," she finally said. "But proving it was her on that call is going to be tough without a recording. The supply company didn't record it." "Then find another way," I insisted. "Check her phone records, subpoena the company's call logs. This cannot go unanswered." That night, as I sat by Lily's bed, listening to the gentle rhythmic pulse of the oxygen concentrator, I felt a profound sense of failure. My fortress of preparedness had been breached. Despite all my planning, all my expertise, I couldn't protect my daughter from the relentless targeted malice of one person. The enemy wasn't a hurricane or a flood. It was a woman armed with a telephone and a bottomless well of hate. And I was beginning to fear that she was winning. The weight of the internal review, the constant online harassment, the fear for Lily's safety. It was a multi-front war, and I was losing ground on all of them. I was the state's expert on disaster, but I was failing to manage the one disaster that mattered most. The midpoint twist didn't come from a dramatic courtroom revelation or a secret informant. It came from a dusty box in my own garage. Detective Rossi had been hitting dead ends. Carol Fletcher was smart. She covered her tracks using burner apps for her online harassment and making the call to the oxygen company from a public payphone, a relic from another era. The HOA board, loyal to Carol, stonewalled the investigation into the ramp violation, claiming it was a routine procedural matter. The internal review at my job was proceeding slowly, casting a long shadow over my career. I was feeling desperate, cornered. One rainy Saturday, while searching for old tax documents to give the internal review board, I stumbled upon a box labeled Sarah, Research. It was filled with my late wife's academic papers, her field notes, her passion projects. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over me. I sat on the cold concrete floor, leafing through the papers, seeing her elegant handwriting, smelling the faint, familiar scent of old books and pressed flowers that always clung to her things. Tucked inside a thick binder was a folder I didn't recognize. It was labeled Willow Creek Environmental Assessment, 2012. My curiosity piqued. I opened it. Inside were detailed soil analysis reports, water table measurements, and a meticulously drafted map of the entire subdivision. Sarah, I remembered, had been hired by the original developers of Willow Creek, long before we ever thought of living here, to conduct an environmental impact study. It was one of her first major contracts as a consultant. As I studied the maps, my eyes were drawn to a series of notations she had made around the area of the community park and duck pond. She had marked several sections with a bright red pen, adding notes in the margin: high concentration of organophosphates, unstable soil substrate, potential for significant sinkhole activity, do not build. I froze. Organophosphates were a key ingredient in certain highly toxic and now banned pesticides. I cross-referenced her map with the current layout of the park. The playground, the meticulously manicured lawn where Carol had confronted us, the entire picnic area was built directly on top of the land Sarah had explicitly flagged as hazardous. My mind raced, connecting disparate pieces of information. The HOA, under Carol's leadership, was famously obsessed with maintaining the park's unnaturally green, weed-free lawn. They spent an exorbitant amount of the community budget on landscaping services. What if they weren't just using standard fertilizer? What if in their obsessive pursuit of aesthetic perfection, they were using banned chemicals, the same ones Sarah had warned about over a decade ago? But the real twist, the one that changed everything, was a single sheet of paper clipped to the back of the report. It was a memo of a meeting between Sarah and the development company's board of directors. The memo detailed her urgent recommendation against developing the park area due to the soil toxicity and instability. And at the bottom of the memo was a list of the board members who had attended that meeting, the ones who had heard her warnings directly. The last name on the list was Fletcher. The first name was Robert, Carol Fletcher's husband. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. This wasn't just about a disabled child's oxygen tank. This wasn't about an accessibility ramp or HOA rules. This was about a secret. A dirty, dangerous secret that had been buried for over a decade. Carol Fletcher and her husband knew the park was a toxic hazard. They had ignored my wife's warnings and allowed the community's children, their own neighbors' children, to play on contaminated land. Carol's obsessive, violent reaction to Lily wasn't just about prejudice. It was about fear. Lily, with her visible medical equipment, was a walking, breathing reminder of health illness and environmental risk. We weren't just a nuisance to her. We were a threat. My position as the head of State Emergency Services, a role that gave me oversight on public health crises and environmental disasters, made me an existential threat to the secret she and her husband had kept for so long. Her relentless campaign to drive us out of the neighborhood, to discredit me, to harm my daughter. It was all a desperate preemptive strike to protect herself. She wasn't just a neighborhood bully. She was a conspirator in a massive long-term cover-up that had endangered the lives of every child in Willow Creek. The game had just changed. I was no longer on the defensive. I was on the hunt. The knowledge of the environmental cover-up was a powerful weapon, but I had to wield it carefully. This was bigger than Carol Fletcher now. It involved her husband, the original developers, and potentially years of falsified landscaping reports. I took my findings not to Detective Rossi, but directly to the state's Environmental Protection Agency, a sister department I had worked with on numerous occasions. I presented Sarah's file, a posthumous testimony from a brilliant scientist whose warnings had been willfully ignored. The EPA director, a grim, determined woman named Dr. Eris Thorne, listened intently, her expression hardening with each page I turned. She promised a full, immediate, and discreet investigation. Meanwhile, the date for the HOA's special community meeting was set. It was called by Carol and her supporters, with the official agenda being a vote on the forced removal of our accessibility ramp. The unofficial agenda, I knew, was to be my public execution. They intended to use the platform to air all their grievances, to solidify the narrative of me as an aggressive, unstable parent and a corrupt official, and to publicly shame my family out of the neighborhood. They had no idea I was about to bring a metaphorical nuclear bomb to their carefully orchestrated kangaroo court. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed to capacity, the air thick with hostility and nervous energy. Carol's faction sat together on one side, a phalanx of grim-faced supporters. My friends and the handful of neighbors who had stood by us sat on the other, looking outnumbered and anxious. I walked in with Lily by my side. Her hand was small but firm in mine. We had talked about it, and she had insisted on being there. "They need to see me, Dad," she had said, her voice quiet but resolute. "They need to see I'm a person, not a problem." Carol Fletcher, acting as the HOA president, stood at the podium, basking in the attention. She began the meeting with a self-congratulatory speech about community standards and property values. She then moved to the main agenda item, our ramp. She spoke of aesthetics, of rules, of the importance of a uniform appearance. She never looked at me, never looked at Lily. We were an abstract concept, a violation on a piece of paper. When she finished, she opened the floor for comments, a mere formality before the inevitable vote. This was my moment. I walked to the microphone at the front of the room. A hush fell over the crowd. My name is Mark Ryland. I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified by the speakers. And this is my daughter Lily. Before you vote on the ramp that allows my daughter to safely enter her own home, there is something you all need to know about the ground you stand on and the park where your children play every day. I saw a flicker of panic in Carol's eyes. Her husband, Robert, sitting in the front row, went rigid. Many of you know my late wife, Dr. Sarah Ryland, was a respected botanist and environmental consultant. I continued. What you don't know is that over a decade ago, she was hired by the original developers of Willow Creek to conduct an environmental assessment. I held up a copy of Sarah's report. She found that the land designated for our community park was dangerously contaminated with toxic chemicals, specifically organophosphates, and was geologically unstable. She recommended, in the strongest possible terms, that nothing be built there. She warned that it posed a significant long-term health risk to anyone exposed to it. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People were shifting in their seats, looking at each other, their faces a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. Her warnings were ignored. I said, my voice rising with controlled anger. The developers, concerned more with profits than with safety, buried her report. And they built the park anyway. Your children have been playing on toxic soil for years. I turned my gaze directly to Robert Fletcher, one of the board members who personally heard my wife's warnings, who saw this report, and who made the decision to bury it, is sitting in this room tonight. Mr. Robert Fletcher. Gasps erupted. Robert Fletcher's face was ashen. Carol gripped the podium, her knuckles white. This is slander. It's a desperate lie from a man trying to evade our community rules. She shrieked, her voice cracking. It is not a lie, I said, my voice cutting through hers. And I have the proof. But the question is why? Why would you do it? And why, Carol, have you been so obsessed with driving my family away? I let the question hang in the air for a beat. Because my daughter, with her medical condition, is a living, breathing reminder of the health risks you and your husband chose to ignore. And my job as head of state emergency services makes me uniquely capable of uncovering the truth. You weren't afraid of our ramp, Carol. You were afraid of me. You stomped on my daughter's oxygen tank, not because it was clutter, but because you saw it as a symbol of the very thing you've been trying to hide. Your campaign of harassment, the lies, the attempt to cut off her oxygen supply. It was all a desperate attempt to silence us, to eliminate a threat to your secret. Just then, the doors at the back of the community center opened. Dr. Eris Thorne from the EPA walked in, flanked by two uniformed state investigators. Behind them was Detective Rossi, Carol Fletcher, and Robert Fletcher. Dr. Thorne's voice boomed through the stunned silence. You are both under investigation for conspiracy, fraud, and reckless endangerment. Based on the evidence provided by Mr. Ryland and our own preliminary soil testing this afternoon, we are officially closing the Willow Creek Community Park, effective immediately. It is a public health hazard. Chaos erupted. People were shouting, crying, hugging their children. Carol Fletcher let out a guttural scream of rage and despair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her in a matter of minutes. Detective Rossi walked calmly to the podium, her eyes locked on Carol. Carol Fletcher. She said, her voice clear and cold. In light of this new evidence demonstrating a clear motive for your actions, I'm also charging you with attempted manslaughter for the incident in the park and for the deliberate attempt to interrupt a vital medical supply. You are under arrest. As Rossi cuffed a screaming, struggling Carol, the community stared, their faces a canvas of shock, betrayal, and dawning, sickening understanding. The climax was not just the exposure of a lie. It was the complete and utter annihilation of a tyrant's reign, brought about by the quiet, unshakable truth. The meeting that was meant to be my downfall had become my vindication, and the final damning judgment on the woman who had tried to destroy my family. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Fletchers. As Carol was led away in handcuffs, a public spectacle of disgrace, her husband Robert was taken in for questioning, his face a mask of defeated resignation. The news of the park's contamination and the decade-long cover-up spread through the community like a shockwave, transforming the Fletchers from respected community leaders into reviled pariahs overnight. Their carefully curated life of privilege and power evaporated in an instant. The subsequent investigation, fueled by Sarah's meticulous report and the EPA's modern soil analysis, was swift and damning. It uncovered a trail of falsified documents, paid-off inspectors, and a cynical, profit-driven decision to endanger children. The legal consequences were severe. Robert Fletcher and the other surviving members of the original development board were indicted on multiple felony charges, including fraud and reckless endangerment. Their assets were frozen, pending a massive class-action lawsuit filed on behalf of the residents of Willow Creek. For Carol, the punishment was even more personal and profound. The charge of attempted manslaughter stuck. The evidence of her calculated campaign of harassment, from the HOA abuse to the call to the oxygen supply company, established a clear pattern of malice and intent. Faced with an overwhelming case against her, she accepted a plea deal that sent her to prison. Her reign as the queen of the HOA was over-ending, not with a quiet retirement, but with the clanging finality of a prison gate. The resolution for our community was a more complex process of healing and rebuilding. The initial shock gave way to anger, then to a collective sense of guilt for having been complicit, even passively, in Carol's regime of petty tyranny. The HOA was summarily dissolved, its authority transferred to a temporary committee of residents, tasked with drafting a new, more humane and equitable charter. The shame of what had happened became a powerful catalyst for change. The park, the epicenter of the crisis, became a symbol of this transformation. The contaminated soil was excavated and removed in a massive state-supervised cleanup operation. In its place, the community, using funds from the class action settlement, decided to build something new. It was Lily who, in a community planning meeting, shyly suggested the idea. "It should be a place for everyone," she said, her voice stronger than I had ever heard it in public. "A place where no one feels left out." Her idea blossomed into the Willow Creek Discovery Garden, a fully accessible multisensory park designed for children of all abilities. It featured smooth, wide pathways for wheelchairs, raised garden beds filled with fragrant herbs for visually impaired children, and quiet shaded nooks for those who, like Lily, sometimes needed a calm space to rest and recharge. The community rallied around the project with a passionate zeal, volunteering their time and resources. The act of building the new park was an act of atonement, a way of physically and symbolically creating a new foundation of inclusivity and care. My own internal review was concluded quickly, with a full exoneration and a formal apology from the governor's office for the distress it had caused. The experience, though harrowing, had deepened the respect between us. He saw me not just as a competent administrator, but as a man who understood on a deeply personal level the human cost of a crisis. The ending of our story was not a return to how things were. It was an arrival at a new, better place. The fortress I had built to protect Lily had been breached, but in its destruction, we had found a truer, stronger form of safety in the embrace of a community that had been forced to rediscover its own heart. Months later, on a bright autumn afternoon, I stood at the edge of the new Discovery Garden. The grand opening ceremony was over, and the space was filled with the laughter of children. I watched Lily, no longer tethered to a portable tank, thanks to a new, more advanced surgical procedure, that her doctors now recommended a positive development, spurred by the renewed focus on her health after the incident. She was sitting on a smooth, curved bench, her sketchbook open on her lap, teaching a younger boy in a wheelchair how to draw the intricate petals of a sunflower from one of the raised beds. She was not just a resident of the community. She was its inspiration. The air was clean. The hiss of her oxygen tank was gone, replaced by the sounds of joy and life. The long shadow of Carol Fletcher had receded, leaving behind not a scar, but a fertile ground where something beautiful and resilient had grown. We had faced the darkness, a targeted personal malice, and had answered it not with equal hate, but with unwavering truth and a fierce, protective love. And in doing so, we had helped our entire community find its way back to the light. The quiet peace we felt was not the fragile peace of before, but a deep, resonant peace, hard-won and deeply cherished, a testament to the enduring power of a father's love and a daughter's quiet courage.